Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event hosted by the Work on Climate community. We are a nonprofit and we're home to the world's largest climate community on Slack. Please join us at workonclimate.org. And of course, one of our main objectives is to bring folks who are involved in the climate space, including venture capital, and help to demystify climate work and make it more accessible for job seekers and founders. So I'm very pleased to welcome Hampus Jakobsson. He is a general partner at the climate tech fund Pale Blue Dot, and that's Pale Blue Dot VC. Pale Blue Dot is an early stage fund focusing on addressing the climate challenge. And prior to becoming a VC, Hampus was an angel investor with 100 plus investments worldwide. And before that, he founded and ran 2 startups. He's a MSc in computer science. He loves cooking and reading fiction. And you can find him on Twitter as well. And that's twitter.com/HAJAK. Welcome, Hampus.
Thanks a lot. That's great. And now you've kind of very much clearly stated my age. Like, obviously I'm ancient because like I had done a lot of stuff. So exactly. No, and like, let's figure out how I can be helpful here as well. Because I think that there are many, yes, thank you. That's great. Thanks, Abby. That's good. Seasoned. No, but I think that there are many angles to this conversation. I think that there are many topics I find very interesting in climate. I think that one can range anything from like, how does one apply oneself to climate? Because I think that's a very common topic I hear when people are saying, I'm not a chemistry major, like, you know, or I'm not a physicist, or I haven't worked on large scale facilities or CapEx things. I don't know what to do. And that's one interesting topic. And then another one is thinking about, okay, so I could do something, but the question is like, what's like, where are the gaps? Like, I don't want to spend my time doing something where there might be 400 other people doing it, and there's very little kind of additionality, so to say, in climate terms. And I think that's great conversations. So I can give you a brief overview about Pale Blue Dot, so you kind of understand where we're coming from on this and kind of why we're doing what we're doing. So Heidi, Will, and myself, the three founders of Pale Blue Dot, we have built and scaled quite a lot of companies, and then invested in quite a lot of companies. And in that process, we were discussing, back and forth what we can do in climate. And this is in 2019, and we were trying to figure out, how do we apply ourselves? And so first we were actually thinking about starting some kind of startup. Like, we were just discussing, and Heidi and Yul ran a micro fund. I worked at a $250 million fund. And we were just discussing kind of, oh, let's go back to where we came from, like starting companies, because that's what we're good at doing. And I think that we're fairly good investors, but like, once a founder, always a founder, I think is kind of the way I view it. I think we have a hard time not wanting to kind of be doing stuff all the time. And then we just started discussing, where's the gap and where can we help out? And then we realized we really felt that once a company has got off the ground and they're got revenue and everything, in a sense, of course, they're a climate company, but in the eyes of investors, they're not a climate company anymore. They're a company that somebody can invest in. And we were discussing back and forth that the big gap is actually there in the early start, when you have to have conviction. And the headache with conviction is, like, if you're the first e-commerce company in the world, you're pitching people that they're going to buy stuff online. People are like, I don't think so. And I think that, I had a friend who was in, I think it was in, well, I'm trying to remember if it was Shanghai or Seoul. I don't remember where it was now. But he came back from either Seoul or Shanghai. I don't remember which one it was. And so I used to work in Seoul, and in Seoul subway, you actually have like kind of a sticker on the wall, which is just like, looks like a store. And then you just pick up your phone and you just scan barcodes and they bring stuff to your house. And it's just a picture of a normal store, like, you know, with milk cartons, whatever. And it's just ingenious, but it's also so simple. It is like barcodes on a wall, but they mimic the way a store looks. And one of my friends, I don't remember if this Shanghai or Seoul it was again, but he came home and was like, holy crap, I think we're going to buy stuff online. And when he said so, I was just like, yeah, I mean, I've been to Seoul, but like, Seoul is a very peculiar city. It's like very tight and everything. And he was saying, I think it's going to happen everywhere. And then he bought stock over a couple of years. He bought stock in Amazon, in Stripe, and in Shopify. Because he said, like, I don't actually know, I can't bet on one thing, but I feel like I just bet on the whole thing happening. And I think he did a couple of other, like 3 or 4 investments that weren't as legendary. But the crazy thing is, like, I remember him telling it to other people, and then most people just looked at him and said, like, this is like 2003 or whatever, 2003 to 2010 or something when he did. And I remember, like, everybody just like looked at him as like he was crazy. And I think that's the headache when you're on a new field, like when you're in climate. The problem is, like, you're just saying, oh, we're going to work on geothermal. People are like, are you crazy? Who cares about geothermal? And one of the things I think is so fascinating with climate is like we need people to go that early. And I think that we all know that founders do that all the time, and researchers do that all the time, journalists do that all the time. For some extraordinary reason, venture capitalists don't. They really stay on the beaten path and done what's tried and tested. So what we said is like, hey, we want to build a fund that actually goes as kind of founders, journalists, researchers, and just goes that early and says, hey, we want to do this. So that's kind of why we do this and like how we came to this. And so then super briefly, Pale Blue Dot is a $100 million fund. We invest super early stage. Some of the founders we invested in literally had 2 people and like 3 slides. And that's all they had. And we were just like, oh, that's great. Here's $1 million. Let's go try it out. So that there's all the range from that to some people actually having revenue. And most of the times we like revenue when it's a market where it's like a market where it's kind of the monetization might be the hardest aspect. So if you're working on cement, like we're not worried that you can't make money. We're worried you can make cement. But if you're working on something which is very esoteric, we might feel like, I wonder actually if there's money. So we invested, for example, in a forest fire protection company. And that's one of those things where we can see the value in it as climate people, but we wondered if like the utility companies can see the value in that. And that's the case where we invested in a company that had revenue. So anyways, so that's kind of us. And we're remote. We are kind of all over the place in Europe. We invested in US and Europe. So far 22 investments, roughly 1 a month. And then we took a bit of a break in April, mostly a combo that we've done so much in January to March, but also then timing really nice with like the world being a bit shaky. And I would say like for anybody who's feels shaky, I would say 2022 has turned out to be the most shaky year and everything. And now I think a lot of you are in US, which I think is like, it's shaky in some, I don't want to go into politics, but it feels like, oh my God, we're shaky in so many different ways right now this year. So I think that I hope that you're holding on to stuff and, hoping that the rest of the year is going to turn out a lot brighter. But yeah, that's the brief about us. And so happy to figure out how I can help you, because I'm super happy to see a lot of you and a huge community who apply themselves to climate.
Yeah, so I think that we can run this kind of as an open Q&A. So what I would suggest is, just raise your hand. I have a few questions that I can ask you in the meantime, Hampus, which usually come in for conversations like these. But, for the audience, if anybody has a question, feel free to just raise your hand with the emoji, not physically, since I can only see one person on the screen right now. But yeah, and we'll get to your questions and you can unmute and ask it then. So I guess one question that I had is, you touched on this briefly, but why the specific focus on early stage, right? Is what are like the philosophical reasons behind it?
Yeah, so the reason is, I would say it's a combination of 2 things. One is a combination of, I like ikigai. Like you look at what you're good at, what's needed, and like what somebody will pay you to do, more or less. And I think that, or that's more what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and what's needed. And I think what we felt is that the one of our biggest challenges as people is that we have many challenges as people, but one of them is that we are founders. And I'm not saying that as a VC saying, oh, we're founders. What I'm saying that is, it's a headache. It's a problem for us, because we tend to really enjoy applying ourselves a lot and being in the founder's shoes and working with a startup. That might sound great for founders. I can say for a venture fund, it's a really bad idea, because we invested in so far 22 companies. So that means that you have 22 teenage kids that are geniuses, as all of them. So they call you at like 11 p.m. on Friday and says like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. And you have already like talked to them twice this week and they love you. So when you're kind of picking up the phone, like usually what happens to me is like after 20 minutes, I'm saying, hey, what's Camilla saying about this, or John, or one of the other people at the board? And they're like, yeah, we're going to talk to them in 6 weeks in the board meeting. And I'm like, yeah, but have you chatted to them at all this week? Hey, Hampus, we only talk to them on the board meetings. And then I realized, okay, so I'm talking to you 3 times a week, and their other investors are talking to you once a quarter. So we're being the ones that are like spending a lot of time. We still like it, but I would say it's a definitely huge challenge. But to answer your question, that is why we like it. Like, I think if we were late-stage investors, I think we would just hate it. I usually tell everybody, like, I love spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets so much, but I just hate other people's spreadsheets. So the thing is, the early stage is great, because like we can all make a neat spreadsheet and talk about it. But when I work with like a mature kind of B-round company and they're sending me their P&L, I just hate it. I just look at this thing. It's like, I am like an borderline autistic person sometimes. I can be like, why are these in this order? And I have to spend an hour reordering their P&L. And the founder would be like, why? And I'm like, just because I don't know. So like early stage is great for us because we can make the spreadsheets. That's really fun. And so that's one part. The other part is that I think that that's when we went out and talked to people about climate and thinking about like doing a climate startup or in some shape or another. We just felt that funds were just so clueless about it. Like we remember one conversation I had in 2019 where we were just talking about methane, and this super smart guy, like I really like him. He's super smart. He was like, "Why are you talking about methane all the time?" And I was like, methane is like, huge climate effect of methane. And he was like, but isn't it all CO2? And I was like, whoa, remember the Kyoto Protocol when we talked about Freon? He was like, yeah, but Freon is out. What do you mean? I was like, oh my God, like it's not like we're talking about greenhouse gas equivalents. And he was like, yeah, exactly. So GHH is like there's many things, right? Methane is one of them. I was like, I have never thought about it. And I realized, holy shit, so we have to educate our investors on like basic fundamental, not only science, but like, very fundamental stuff. And then I felt, holy shit, they're like, we need this, right? So I think it was definitely a drive of two things where we felt frustration that there was no product there. And the other thing is that we just felt, we're going to do this. We're going to enjoy that a lot. So I think that's the very long answer to your question.
I think that makes perfect sense. And what do you usually look for in the types of companies that you invest in, or what do you look for in those companies as qualities?
So Heidi and you and I are slightly different, and I think we designed the way our firm works. It works on friction and passion and tension is like our process. So like it works with somebody says, "I love this company, I love them to bits, I love these founders," and then the other ones are saying, "Hey, do you want help being talked out of this deal, or do you want to help talk into this deal?" And then we kind of fight or help the person who's now in love with this thing. So that means that if you talk to me, I'm going to say something. If you talk to you, we'll say another thing, and Heidi a third thing. But generally, I think Heidi and I tend to love stuff that are like people that we wish did great stuff, which, sorry to say, well, maybe not in this audience, but sorry to say, mostly not like white, super privileged men. I think what both Heidi and I have a slight kind of, like we always feel like when we get the deck and they're like four people who are at Bain and their last name is all the same and they kind of worked at they were at the same kind of Stanford education. We just feel like, oh, I don't want to work with these dudes. And like, oh, one is William. Like, oh shit, the other one's Bill. Oh shit, Bill and William is the same thing in the US. Damn, they have the same name. So like it's just like it's like a bit off-putting. And then I think both of us like when it's a market that is like one of those things which is either super stale and it's going to move, or it's one of those things that's already moving. And then Heidi and I have one difference, which is Heidi tends to like something which you can already see how it's moving, and I tend to love stuff that are very binary. So I love stuff which is like 60% probability this will never work, 40% it's going to work, and if it works, and Heidi kind of feels like, I don't like that. And I think that like I have a science background, so I tend to like stuff which is like, re-engineering crops. Like if it works, we can design crops. Heidi's like, why would you bother all of that? And Heidi's like more like, give me a good solid SaaS company or something. And then Yuval is very focused on the solution. So Yuval is really obsessed about like, how does this product work, and how is the product like the actual best instance of that solution? Heidi and I are way more great people figure it out. Whereas Yuval says like, yeah, but great people don't come up with the wrong product. So a lot of tension is like when Yuval comes in and he's like, he comes in with this like, yeah, I know, hey guys, I know that one of them is like a Bain dude, I know, but look at the product, and he's like, look how amazing, and Heidi just stare at the product. It's like, we don't care about the product, and he's like, no. And then he pesters us when we come in and like, look at these founders, they're awesome people, and look at the market. And he was like, but they don't have a product. We're like, yeah, but come on, they're gonna build it. So Heidi did like a 401k, like a lot of your Americans, like pension plan, right? Which is like one super strong founder. We love her to bits. And she was like one day leaving her job and saying, I'm about to raise my C round for my startup. We have still not figured out the fossil-free 401k. I'm raising this round, then I'm leaving the company and I'm doing a 401k. And she was like a friend of mine. And my friend just picked up the phone and essentially called her. It's like, hey, a friend of mine is leaving her job to do this thing. And I was like, what? Connect her to Heidi. And Heidi was like, let's go. So we invested like day 3. She was like, hey, Alex, we really want to back you. Do you have anything? She was like, I have this idea and this anger. That's great. Give you $1 million to fuel that anger. So like, I think capital is courage. And I think that's like, we felt like, hey, move on, Alex, with this thing. This is a great idea. So long answer again to your question. I'm so bad at short answers. I should just say yes or no. Next answer, I'm just going to say yes or no now. Are you ready?
I'll open the floor up to the audience as well. If anyone has any question while you think about those, in the audience have one more question for you, Hampus. from both sides, job seekers as well as founders. A, why is right now a good time to work in climate in general? And B, is it a good time to start a venture at the moment?
Yes, I was able to say yes or no to that one. That's good. No, I'm kidding. I think that I think the thing is, it's always a good time to start. I think right now, I think that the companies I would start now versus the companies I would have started 18 months ago are slightly different. I think right now, with like, you know, the world is getting a lot tighter and people are saying, oh, what's going to go on? I think today I would probably start companies that either have like a kind of a deep like dip, like J curve is what we call it in venture, like it goes down a lot and then it goes up, or so it's like scientifically complicated or something. So, or I would do something where it's very easy to monetize. What I mean is, like, I wouldn't do anything where you're going to be measured on revenue in like 9 months and you won't have like either super solid revenue or something which is like revenue is not the discussion. So let me give an example. If you re-engineer crops, like don't do another one. I'll tell you about the one we've done if you want to. But if you're working on that, nobody's going to ask you, can you make money? Like, I can design crops. I can design a new potato. And people are like, oh my God, does it work? Again, that's the right question. Does it work? It's like, you don't like, can you make money on it? Like, if you can design rice that can grow in salt water, will you make money on it? Yes. Can you make it work? That's the conversation. So that company could raise, like, that company can be built in like come hell or high water. Like, doesn't matter. Like, if it works, it works. And then the other company is like, you come in and you reduce the energy needed when you produce steel. You come in and you're like, we reduce energy 20% on steel. People are like, give them money. Because that means, like, you know, it's a tough time, energy prices are high. It's like people like, they will still make steel, right? I think the companies I wouldn't make are like, can we figure out a business where, I'm trying to make something up now, like a new product need or a new behavior that we're not really sure is there yet and it's nascent, and people would look at it and say, so it's a more expensive, so we make like a fake meat but it's more expensive, but it's definitely better for health, and you would look at it and say, do you think that's going to be a good idea 2023, where people look at this like lupine beef, which is very complicated and very processed, but it's better for health, so like people have to shell up more money. It's like there's a lot of thing in the market. Like the only way to measure that company is like you have booming sales. So I mean, somebody might bite it and say it tastes like a burger, but like right now, 2022, I don't know what that matters. So I would definitely think about the kind of company I would start. So like either you do something which you know that you can monetize because you save like energy or whatever, or you do something where if it works, it's magic.
So. Yeah, that's, I think, very insightful. There's a question from the audience. Kevin, go ahead and ask it yourself.
Yeah, hi Hampus, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us all today. For context, like, I'm actually a student at USC and I'm about to graduate within the coming semester, kind of going out into the workforce. And I think the conversation that a lot of my friends and I who are very impact driven is that we all want to work basically in sustainability and climate. We want to break into the space post-graduation, either as, you know, working in climate tech venture capital or working as a part of a climate tech startup. So I'm just very curious about maybe some of your recommendations for how to break into the sector as a postgraduate student, or like just, you know, entering the workforce as well.
Yeah, I would say that I think it's actually I think it's kind of no different than it is for a generic thing in a sense. So I kind of view things generally two ways. When I meet somebody, I kind of ask them, like, and this is like not more generic question, but I ask them like, are you a nuclear scientist? And they say no. And it's like, oh, so then you should probably be a very generalist. I think the head is like, so like, you don't have to be a nuclear scientist, but it's like, you're a process chemist. That's great. Market the shit out of the fact that you're a process chemist. like take the thing you do and make that your thing, and then go to everybody and say, I'm a process chemist. I work with process chemistry. Like I did my degree in process chemistry. I can help you doing optimizing that process, and whatever. If you whatever you are, like double down to that. If you're not kind of really anything, if you feel like I can't really see my education being applied, then I would definitely say like, okay, I'm a generalist, and then like really go in like. You're a developer, or you're like a marketeer, or you're a product manager, or you're a project manager. You're like, okay, so I don't have like a special kind of thing which about climate. I'm more just the person fixing problems. Then I would actually take a stance on that and say, okay, so what do I do? And then I would try to think of, I think that the thing I think about a lot is, so I think sometimes I think first of all is like, if you want to work for a startup, you want to work for corporate, if you want to work for a VC, where are you going to be, where you want to be. And I think that one of the things I think a lot of people think they want to work in VC, but they don't really realize that working in a VC is one of the strangest jobs you can ever have. It's very close. I usually jokingly say my job is like going into like a Monte Carlo or like a Las Vegas, whatever, and you go in and you sit down at a blackjack table, and people just deal you cards, and you like pick up this card and you're like queen, duck, ace. And you're like, what the fuck is a duck? And you have no idea. And now somebody says to you, do you want a meeting with us? And you're like, I have no idea what this duck is. And now I have to decide. I'm like, how is Tuesday at 1? Here's my calendar. I'm like, okay, so I have to do research and figure out what duck means. And it's like, what I mean here is like, hey, we do geothermal startups. Okay, what's the problem in geothermal? The next company I'm going to like modular nuclear. It's like, okay, next company is going to like energy need of steel. So like the thing is like, you just have to flip super quickly between subjects, and everybody thinks they're working on the most important thing. So they are going to be like, why are you not bothering with me? And I'm like, I don't understand geothermal. So like, it's a really strange job. And I would say like most people say, oh, that's exciting. But what ends up being, it's more like being, a telephone person at like whatever, AT&T or whatever, but it's like people just call you with questions and you have to answer them. So, but I think that, so then if you go back, do you want to work at a corporate or a startup? I think the way I think about it is like, how comfortable are you working with a complete unknown? So I think that if you want to work for a corporate, like I think most people, if you want somebody to tell you what's going to happen in 6 months, and somebody should tell you you're doing a good job, and you have like a professional manager and like get performance reviews and stuff like that, then a corporate job is good. You will get none of those at a startup. Like your job is going to, like your boss is going to be completely clueless because your boss is just like you. Performance reviews, people will book performance reviews, but then they'll forget them or move them, right? And when they have performance reviews, they're going to talk about something else. So I think that anytime you're saying, I would love to work and be coached, then a startup is not that. If you want to work for a startup, the thing is, it's more like you're being dropped behind enemy lines. You're just like, great, Kevin, you're go. And you're like, okay, so like, I'll just have to do it. And one of my most common analogies to people is like, startup people are like, you're standing at the bottom of a skyscraper, or like just a high rise, and there's an elevator and there's a staircase up. And typically startup people, what they do is they press the button, they wait, and after a couple of minutes they go like, okay, fuck this, I'm just gonna walk. Corporates, they click the button and they wait for the elevator, because like, hey, there's an elevator, I'm supposed to take the elevator. If I walk the stairs, I'm not sure, maybe there's a fire exit, I'm gonna mess something up, I'm just gonna wait for the elevator. So you have to have that impatience of like, okay, what the fuck, I'm just gonna walk, which is probably the most stupid decision, but hey, after a while you're gonna be awesome at it, right? So I think that I usually I like to ask myself, like, where are you, like what kind of personality you are? And then I think that a lot of people ask me, should I start a company? And if you ask yourself, should you start a company? I think that there's a very, like, I find there's a bit of an easy matrix, like a 2x2. So you think about yourself, like, how much do you want to be enabling versus driving? And enabling means that, you get other people to be able to do something. You get many shots on goal. So like, see yourself as like, easiest is like your coach or whatever. So like you get a lot of people you're coaching. Obviously that might be not your first job here. And then the other one is like you're driving, which means like if it fails, it's on you. And some people would say like, I don't want that feeling. I would prefer to like having that. And then I think on the other end, like 2x2 is breadth versus depth. So depth is like, you're the expert. Some people ask, do you know what you're talking about, Kevin? You're like, yes. Or you say like, no, that's not a PhD. And breadth is like, a little bit of everything, right? So I think in that 2x2, there's like 4 very distinct personalities. You have like breadth, depth, and then you have like enable and drive. And you typically, founders usually need to be like drive and depth. So they're like, I'm the best person in cement and the buck stops with me. And if you're not that person, maybe you don't want to start a company. Because the problem of being a founder, it's like kind of like, I have a couple of friends who are bipolar or who came out as gay in high school, and it's kind of similar. You're the only person who gets what you're talking about until you find your community. And it's kind of a weird feeling when you're like, just like, you tell people about cement, and then one day somebody says, that's genius. And you're like, is it? I've been talking about cement for 9 months and everybody calls me crazy. And you're like, wow, I found my people. So I think it's fairly like lonely, but I think that now I'm going a long rant here, Kevin. I'm sorry. I've already said I'm bad with short answers, right? But I would say like, what I would figure out is like, who am I? And I would try to double down on who you are. And then I would say, are you an impatient person that just likes to get stuff done and gets up the stairs before the elevator comes? Okay, startup land. Or are you the person who says, I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to be the person who's in the middle of the night going to like just wake up and see like, I have to do this thing. And I know it's like madness. Then maybe founder. If you feel neither of those, then back away. And then I think on what skill set, I would always tell everybody, like every time I sit down and talk with a person and they tell me their background story, I just say like, that's the thing you should focus on. And it might be like, hey, I come from a rural family. I kind of grew up on an avocado farm. I'm just making shit up now. Avocado farm. But then went into software development, da 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 da. And then I was like, okay, but hey, when you were a kid, you were actually on a farm quite a lot. Yeah, yeah, of course. Like you farmed shitloads of avocados. Yeah. Is that industry digitalized? You're like, are you kidding me? Whoa, 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 whoa. Have you built stuff for your family? Yeah, I built some stuff. Why don't you talk about that? Like you have like massive interesting experience where you actually work with a problem hands-on with actually something you have your degree in. Yeah, but it became avocado farming. I'm like, no, but don't care about avocados. You've been like IoT applied in the field for crop growing. Double down on that, like make that your story. And people usually go like, that's a tiny thing. Like how many years did it? Like 8, but I was 12. 8 years of your life. That's more professional experience than most people. So like I would just like search your own CV and then figure out what's the thing I should double down on. And then like, let's go do that. And I would say, I know, Joseph, I'm gonna make sure that you guys can ask a question, but I would say like absolutely the same thing when you start a company. I think one of the most common questions I have, and same thing when Heidi is asking questions, is like, what's the founding story? Like we really want to hear like, why are you building this company? And I think the only answer I hate is it's a $2.6 billion market waiting to be shifted. I'm like, the people who think like that, I don't know if they're real people. It's a spreadsheet thinking like that. And you know what I think about other people's spreadsheets. So I think the thing about it is like, why the best answer I always find where people are like, why are you doing this? Is like, usually the best answer is like, I can't not do it. Like I can't stop myself. I would prefer not doing it. It's like, I would love someone else do this. But the thing is, I waited and then nobody did it. And I was like, and then I'm doing it. And I'm hoping that somebody solves it. And maybe it's me. So I think that if you find that problem within yourself, go find that startup, go start at the company. I think you're going to probably find it. Sorry, long answer. Like I should move over to Joseph. Is this going to be a yes or no answer, Joseph?
Unfortunately, no, not at all. Sorry, disappointing. I like long answers, so I'm appreciating it. So I'm just going to set you up for another one. Sorry. So I was just wondering earlier, you mentioned something about being worried about kind of ideas that are either too stale or already moving too much, and I might be paraphrasing there, but I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that. Like, how do you evaluate if a space is already moving too much? Like, how much is too much? When you see competitors in a space already, is that some sign that there's an opportunity there? Do you only look at opportunities or nothing's going on?
It's a great question, and I think that for me, I think that so I kind of, it's a really good question, and I think that sometimes I think that VCs tend to over-explain this. Like VCs spend so much time on coming up why the why now, but at the end of the day, Instagram wasn't the first thing, or Flickr wasn't the first thing, or Facebook wasn't the first thing. Why Facebook now? It's just like, no, I don't know, right? But I think that at least in VC land, we always try to make up like it was like exactly when the industry started modernizing or whatever. And there's some truth to that, but I think that we tend to exaggerate it quite a lot, and VCs tend to exaggerate. But the way I look at it is like, if you're attacking markets, like typically companies we hate, and not hate on them, I think they're like everybody should do their company. But like whenever we get a company that does like recyclable cups, which is like you get a thing, it has a barcode, you get a restaurant, and now instead of getting a normal cup, you get this like hard metal cup, and then you can get it refilled, and as a barcode, and you scan it and you get refill. Whenever we find that, we're just like, this is the 21st of these companies we've seen. Like we've seen so many of them, and why would this one become huge? And everybody says that, oh, but this market is taken off. I would like, yeah, but 21 of them, or like 21 that we've seen, right? So that's a market where actually like it's saturated, and also there's very little defensibility. So I think it kind of gets back to maybe a bit about what I said about to Kevin as well. It's like kind of why now? It is like, you're just like, oh, because I know everything about cups. It's just like, do you? And maybe you do. And then it's like, by God, go do it, right? But I would just like, most of these things are very kind of artificial. It's just like I had a friend who worked at Wendy's. They complained about this. We said, why don't we do it? We built a prototype in college. Then we said we'd scale it. It's just like, yeah, but did you think about it twice? So I think that I would say there's a huge art in starting companies, but honestly, there's a huge art in stopping as well. They're just saying, hey, I spent a month on this when I was in college. It's great, but come on. Like, is this a company, or is this just like my college project? Skip it. So I think that I would say but there's typically a market which I'm sometimes interested in. That's a market that hasn't changed for a very long time. So typically if you look at like steel making, cement making, the logistics industry, a lot of these things are just like, you look at them and you're just like, what has happened? And like, how are these industries data driven? And it's just like, oh my God, this is like, nothing's happened, right? And then it's like, whenever I see that, I just go like, so why hasn't it happened? So I think like, if you would have been around me for a long time, which I really hope you don't have to be, it's like, I'm like your local 5-year-old. I'm like, why? And when people said like, oh, why hasn't the industry changed? When you make cement, it's really expensive. Why is it expensive? The cement plant is huge. Why is it huge? Cement is a scale industry. So like there are tight margins. You build huge plants. Huge plants might multiply by small scales. You make a lot of money. But why does it have to be scale? Could it be an efficiency industry? What do you mean? Could you make cement where it's like you actually have fat margins? Never thought about that. Aha. That's the question I'm going to ask myself. Can you make cement when you actually have like double-digit margins? That's going to be my question. And if you double click on that, you're going to notice that in some parts of the world, like LA, where somebody were, in LA, half of the price of cement is transportation cost. Because cement is a scale industry. And in scale, they find the biggest quarries they can find, like this big ass kind of dig sites. And they build a cement facility more or less in it or within it or very close to it. And then you suddenly come to LA where they're actually kind of nice quarries, but they're small. And the thing is, because cement plants are built bespoke, they're designed for the thing, it's not more expensive to build a big one than a small one. So if you're a cement company, you're going to build a big one, which means that nobody's building small cement plants because it hasn't been profitable. And because cement has been a kind of a scale industry, somebody could now come in and make like a productized cement facility, make it tight, small, put it in LA, and suddenly half of the money is your margin, right? And nobody's doing that. And the cement industry, they will never do it because why would they change? Their industry is built on scale. So that's one of those things where you just double click long enough, you come to a point where you're just like, what? And then some industries hasn't changed because like you realize after a while, like, oh my God, the upfront costs are so huge that you don't want to do it. Or for example, anything that ends up with you owning land is not one of those, like you click, and you get to a point it's like, oh, so then you need to own land. Then I always go like, ooh, try to avoid owning land because every wealthy person on the planet is trying to avoid like buy land. So I would say like a very, very short thing about it is like, I love the situation when I talk to founder and it's obvious to the founder and it's obvious to me, but it's not obvious to anybody else. That's my favorite situation. I hate when the founder pitches me, they find it obvious, I find it obvious, but I also just read it in New York Times. Because then I feel like now so then it's like, why on earth would this thing work? Because everybody knows this is true. Either it doesn't work because it's impossible, or it doesn't work because like, no company can be big because there's thousands of them already. So yeah.
Sorry, Hampus, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. Do you want to go, Lucas? Did I answer your question, Joseph? Short and sweet.
Yes, I mean, I could ask follow-ups, but I want to leave time for other people.
Yeah. And otherwise ping me on Twitter. Like, I'm happy to have these conversations forever. But sorry, Lucas, you go.
Yeah, Hampus, thank you very much. I'm a co-founder in a deep tech startup, and we are reinventing battery recycling for electric vehicles. And I have a question regarding investment strategies, because we're raising pre-seed this summer. So would you, from an investor's perspective, suggest that we either raise just enough to get the next milestone, so technical readiness from 4 to 5 to de-risk it? Or would you rather suggest for us to raise enough so we can actually get it to commercial viability, so technical readiness 7 and 8? So I know, I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear your view on how you see it.
So I think that this is an answer without just so many details of it. But like, you have to, one more time, what did the company do? Deep tech company doing what?
So we invent a new way to recycle batteries for electric cars.
Okay, great. Okay, battery recycling. Okay, so I would say like the thing I would say is that first of all, in 2022, if you can raise money to get 3 years runway, I would do it.
Okay.
Like 2022, if you can get 2 to 3 years runway, go do it. Like why not? The reason why not to do that, because I think that's important to think about. The reason is that dilution is going to be fairly, like it's better to like, if you can stage it out, right? Essentially fundraising is like a staircase. If you can now we earn like 2 steps. And if we're raising the third step is going to be a bit expensive for us. But like, if we can figure out a way where we can just take them step by step, our valuation per step is going to be better. The headache now 2022 is like, maybe everybody's afraid. So like, if you can get the money for 4 steps, like I would just take them more or less. Okay. I would never want to do, I think that I always try to ask myself is like, I don't want a situation where the founders are more than 50% diluted together at like pre-A round. So like, I think that's a very uncomfortable situation. And I think that there should be probably even more. Nuances though, I would ask myself is that sometimes you can have these situations where like there's one big, I usually try to catalog with the startups, like I truly, though I work with, I usually try to catalog the fear, uncertainty, doubts, so FUDs. So I write, like we created documents which are called the FUDs. And then we just ask a lot of people. Like you can literally ask like, your sister, 3 of my employees. It's just like, 3 VCs. Don't try to ask like the people who you think would give you money. Just ask people. And then you ask them, so like, we're doing this battery recycling, this is the problem. And then you ask them, what's your fear, uncertainty, doubt? And what you're going to find is some people will say, I wonder if there's a market. You're like, you will like, duh. But they're like, okay, I'll hear you. I'll write a thing about that. And then the way I think works is like, if I show you 5 slides, it's like, you're going to show whatever your brother, 5 slides. Like, here are the 5 slides about the company. Okay, Joe. So like, now what's your doubts? And if he still says, I don't wonder if there's going to be a market, like, okay, my slides suck. Because that should be obvious. Okay, so I'm dumb. Let me rework it, Joe. You rework it, and like you then show whatever, Joe's friend or something. And then Joe's friend says, can you get enough supply? And you're like, what do you mean? Will not all the battery manufacturers want to do this themselves? You're like,
yeah.
Good question. That's a good question. Let's add that to the deck. And then I would work with, not even trying to raise money, I would try to figure out, like, is there a pool of fear, uncertainty, doubts that I could figure out very, very quickly? And if you suddenly realize we can actually solve most of the fear, uncertainty, doubts of people with like 3 more months, then if it wasn't 2022, I would probably say, maybe we just want, a bit of cash. Because like everybody hones in on the same thing, which we think is so obvious that it's going to be easy. And then I would add a bit of buffer because it's not as easy as we think. But I would say 2022, slightly different. I would add extra capital. But the thing I would do is like, I would try to make sure, I love the fear, uncertainty, doubt exercise. Because the thing I find so many times is there's some people, we meet a lot of startups, like they come to us like, oh, we do battery recycling, which is like a great area. And they say, hey, we have one customer and they're buying from us. That actually might not, that doesn't solve any of our headaches. Because our headache is not, can you make money if you do battery recycling? Because we think that's obvious. Like that's got to be the easy part. We're asking is like, hey, how many customers can you get? What kind of customers? All of those questions, right? So one of the things that we value a lot is clarity of thought. So what we mean by that is like, we love when we talk to a founder and they lecture us about how the market works. They're like, do you know that look at Europe right now on what now? I lose blank on it.
Lithium.
No, I was actually just going to say natural gas, but sorry, exactly. But look at Europe now on natural gas, right? And so like that is going to be that in spades on lithium and most rare minerals that needed for batteries, right? Because right now, Europe and most of the world is dependent on natural gas. But in 20 years, that's not going to be the case. They're going to be dependent on batteries. What do you think is going to happen when there's going to be war somewhere in the world and Europe knows like shit, fuck, or whatever in the world, it's going to like 50% of our batteries need the supply chain to work and doesn't work. Then we have like an oil crisis times 100. So I think that I would just like, I love when we talk to founders and they talk us through this thing and then essentially makes the world obvious. What, sorry? Sorry, should I turn on? Let's get to the button. Sorry, my 10-year-old daughter comes in, tells me I have to turn on an AC because she's really warm. So I'm just going to go into this. She's probably going to come into the picture now.
Hello.
Yeah, Mantuva. Yeah. Sorry, people. 10-year-old daughter not in sync with the fact that the window is open. The life. Sorry. I hope you got an answer, Lucas.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you, Hampus.
All right. Mariana, sorry.
Hi, thank you so much for the call. It's been really great to hear from you. My question is a bit different. I work managing the fundraising of C40 cities. We're a network of, I think, almost 100 cities pushing for urban and ambitious climate policy. And as a next step into my career, I'm looking at moving into VC. Do you have any tips for someone moving from the not-for-profit into venture capital?
Yeah, I would say that this is like a version of Kevin's, I would say, is like, I would definitely double down on the thing you could do. And I think that the thing I would avoid is so there's 2 skills about it. There's one skill which has something to do with money. And there's one skill which is something about your topic, like cities, right? And I would avoid everything about that I can handle money. Because the thing is that's kind of like you're trying to tell like a horse champion that you can ride a horse. They're just like, that's what they do. They're to be like, I'm not impressed by your skills. And sorry, like you might be amazing, right? So like that's not the thing, right? But you know something that they don't have a clue about, which is cities. So I think I would definitely go like, I've done this for C40. I know everything about all cities problems. And then it's like, then people be like, that's what they want to buy. And I think there are a couple of funds. So like, for example, you have like 2150, which is like the Kristen Nicole's fund. And then I would talk to, what are they called? 2BX, which is a German fund, depends on where you're based, of course. And 2050, Marie Ekeland's fund in Paris. What else like do I know that are like construction tech funds? I would try to find a fund that is like they are thinking about cities. And I think that the problem is like you can't go to like a generalist fund because they might do one deal out of 20, which has something to do with cities. So I would try to go find a fund which is about cities. 2150, I think, is the best target. If you send me an email, I'm happy to like, forward that to 2150.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll send you an email.
Great.
Thanks.
No worries. Brent? Oh, you're on mute, Brent.
Yep, there we go.
There. Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm, I'm a mechanical engineer and technical generalist focused on the built environment. So I've been an HVAC engineer, I've been a commissioning agent, I've worked for a couple of startups. I've been working on buildings, energy use, and built environment for more than 20 years. And what I'm wanting to do now is not work for another startup, but work for multiples of them. I've set myself up as a consultant, and one of the things that I've observed is startups trying to come into the building and energy space that don't have a lot of industry experience.
No,
that's something I can offer. Likewise, for investors who need technical vetting of things in the technologies in the built environment space, again, that's something I can do. What I'm trying to figure out is how to connect with the relevant people that can use my skills, because at this point in my career, I can do a few hours for a bunch of different companies and do a lot more good for the world than putting all my eggs in one basket.
No, I agree with you. I think that's a great question. And I think that this is a question, I think, for a lot of people that, like, if you're a climate, like, let's say you're a journalist, for example, it's going to be the same problem. It's like, hey, I can work for one company and write for them. But, like, can I? Like, will they need my craft, like, this much time or not? And I think that a lot of these professions are like, I think I'm better at, like, again, backing to, like, breadth versus depth, like, enable versus drive. It's like, you're typically like an enabling role. Like, you're a coach of many. So, like, how do you want to play it? So I think that I usually recommend people to do, everybody I know who's done that journey has usually done some kind of like they have two roads in. Either they are writing a blog or doing a podcast or something, and then they're just like the expert in the field. People end up like, go talk to Brent, like, listen to his podcast, he's extraordinary. So there's one dude, a US dude, that's done a thing about, I'm trying to remember the name of the blog now and podcast, but I talked to him quite a bit. The story with him is like, he essentially was obsessed by not HVAC, but I remember what it was. Similar kind of ish field like HVAC. I think it was some energy balancing, grid balancing. I don't remember what it was now. But he was trying to figure out, he started a podcast. And then when we chatted, he was just saying, how do I merge into, like, working for VCs? And I ended up saying, I think you should just like say, end each podcast more or less with like, do you want to talk to me? And like, happy to help out, because everybody thought he was like some, like, whatever, full-time journalist and didn't have time. He added that thing, and then he like asked him 3 months later. He said, like, I'm just inundated by requests. People would ping me, and the headache he had was actually figuring out who are the people who just want to exploit him, and like, not exploit, but like, get a freebie, and like, oh, could you help me out with this one? And who are the people who say, hey, I really need help and I'm happy to pay you money? I think the headache with startups, though, is that startups tend to have lots of energy but little money. So for them to kind of pay for somebody to help them out, I think the most common thing is you're going to get equity. So that you're going to get like an advisor equity or something, where like, which doesn't buy you food. So like, depends on how your situation is set up, of course. And the thing with funds is that a lot of funds nowadays, there are a couple of expert networks. I'm trying to remember the name of them, but there are a couple of super interesting expert networks where you can sign up and you can say, like, I'm an expert of this, and people can ping you and say, I'll pay you $5,000 if I get to ask you a question, because they need it. And especially if they're in, like, a friend of mine does that within biology, but for growth media, for what is it called, cultured meats. So she essentially, as soon as somebody has a question about growth media, they just end up pinging her and say, can you help me out? And she just says, yeah, 5,000, I'll talk to you for half an hour. And I don't, like, if you want more, then set up a project. And it's great, because like, she's such a specialist that is a question about growth media, well, you'll end up talking to her. But I think that's the end. Of course, the way she got that is that she used to work at a company that was specialized in growth media. One people left and started a new company. They recommended her, blah, 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 blah. So like, she got like a bit of a community. But that's the thing I would think about, is how do you get that? And most of those things are done by doing a podcast, doing a blog, doing a book. I don't know. I think depends on what the way to do it. I think another way I would say is, yeah, exactly. Great list of like channels there to apply yourselves on. I would say the other thing I would do is like, I always feel like, how do you find, this is kind of back maybe to the ikigai part, is like, how do you find the part where you can leverage the need that somebody recognizes their value of it? Because I think the headache is like, you might find I'm super useful here, but they don't understand it. I think that's a super common challenge for a lot of people. It's like, they know, you know, that if I'll help you, like, I mean, anybody who's got kids recognize this, right? You just be like, I can tell you and I'll help you, and your kids will appreciate it in 30 years. So like 20, 30 years later, they're like, the thing you did for me when I was 8, that was great. You're like, thank you. Now it came back. It just took 22 years for you to realize. But the thing is that's a problem. It's like, if you help a startup, most of them will be like, I don't need you. And you're like, I promise you're going to need it. Like, I promise you don't know what you're doing. And they're like, I know what I'm doing. In 10 years, you're going to realize you didn't, but then it's too late. So I think that's a big challenge of how do you actually get people to realize that I actually need Brent's help. And I think that's that I would say is the biggest nut to crack. I don't have like a good response, but I would say the way I would go about it is I would probably write short snippets on a blog, or like do like a mini podcast, or do a format where you feel comfortable that you can produce stuff in, so that you get a following of people who are your people who think, when Brett says this about this area, he knows what he's talking about. And then a friend of theirs was like, oh, we're actually looking at a company like that, and you should probably go talk to Brent, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Any particular thoughts about how to approach the investor community? The value I see there is being able to help somebody evaluate the technical virtues of an investment, option or possibility.
Two ways. I think there are a couple of these expert platforms that you can register on, and then the other way I would do it is, I think that exactly the same way. It's like, if you have like the friend of mine who does growth media, she only works for investors. She, like, essentially her gig is like, investors wants to invest in like some kind of cultured meat company, and they end up having some questions, and they don't realize suddenly that they're not a biologist, and they go like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I need help. So I think that, and I think that the question is, of course, how she got to that point. She got to that point, by helping 3 investors that were super happy, and then told everyone else about it. And I think the good thing about investors, though, is that when that company raised a new round, which in one of the cases for her is that company raised a new round, they said, you should talk to her reference, which is really good. She's worked in this industry. And then the new VC doing the A round went and talked to her again. And she was like, okay, I'll tell you the same thing again, but I'll take twice the price because now it's an A round. And the investors were like, this is great. I know, by the way, we have 3 co-investors. You should probably talk to them. And she was like, yeah, sure, just forward them, right? Like, if you want me to talk to more people and saying the same thing again and get them to pay 10K, go ahead, intro them. So I think that's the way to find somebody who says what Brent said to us was gold. And the thing there is really understanding investors is like trying to figure out what their question really is. Is like the thing about investors is very much like teenage kids. They don't want to learn the subject. They just want to ace the test. So they just want their ass covered. So they want to send something to say, we checked it out, it's done, like it's not wrong. And then some investors that are really smart, they actually want to know what the big headache it is. So, but that's very rare. Most of them just want something that says, thumbs up, here's the reason. They can put that in the file so that somebody says, why did we do it? It's like, we got this report from Brent, he's an ace, I didn't do no wrong, my ass is covered. Because none of them wants to go back to college. Very few of them are like, please tell me about how it works. So I'm one of them. So like, I will be the expensive client, but I'll be like, no, tell me more. You're like, no, shit, I'm talking to one of those dudes. It's much better if I
anything in buildings.
Oh, like we've actually looked quite a lot at like buildings. We've done one which is underwriting risks of climate, and then we have looked quite a lot at HVAC systems. Now we're looking a bit at retrofitting. So like, there's quite a lot. I would say like this is also going back to, actually it's similar to, remember who? Oh, Mariana, exactly. So like 2150 and like some of these construction tech funds, I think for them it's like actually assessing and understanding stuff like HVAC and energy grid systems are really complex. So I think that, and there's a whole bunch. I don't know geographically if you're in the US, it's the same. The headache you're going to find though is like, if you talk to them, you might have the problem that they actually have somebody, of course. So then you'll have to either like split that thing and say, oh no, that person is actually this, I'm this. So it could be that person is specialized on HVAC, and you're like, no, I'm on energy load balancing. So HVAC is a part of that problem. I'm actually the part where like you put on huge stuff on the grid, and that's gonna like blow a lot of fuses. That's what I'm helping you with. Now I'm just making stuff, Brent. So I'm not sure that's their field. But I would try to figure out like where, and I think that the thing about is like trying to figure out that you're going to be a one-trick pony. Like the thing you really want is you want a situation where people says, do you have a question about X? Then go and talk to Brent. So like, you don't want to have like, do you have technical questions? Go and talk to Brent, because that's so broad. You want to like, do you have, like, are you looking at refurbishing? Go and talk to Brent. Or do you want to HVAC? Go and talk to Brent. Because that's like, we're in a situation where people are like, you do one thing and you do one thing well. And then if people realize, oh, actually you do a lot of these things. Yeah. But like, I don't want to complicate it for you.
Before
Yeah,
we,
I'm a
just
generalist with
just
a
a
couple
quick
of
time check.
specialists.
We just have 8 minutes left. We have 2 questions from the audience, so let's move on to Srinath.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Hampus. This is very interesting. Quick question for you, which is just thinking, just like ideologically, which is that in terms of go-to-market, how much of like your portfolio, a lot of your portfolio seems to be like heavily like B2B or B2B2C, if else, and like my sort of optimistic skeptical view is that company pressure is extremely hard to apply to change like supply sourcing or sourcing decisions unless it's like cost competitive.
Yeah.
Are you guys seeing like a go-to-market challenge across like a lot of your portfolio? And is there momentum to like try and push on like climate, like goal setting and like companies' commitments to like these big sort of coalitions like Climate 100+? Because like it's almost like you need a forcing function to drive these companies to actually achieve the sales they want to actually sustain themselves. And like, is there like an external forcing function that you're going to have to push on? Because if not, they're going to like kind of not make it to the next stage.
I think it's a super interesting question. And I think that I've found that it very depends on like what slice you're taking of the market. So I would say like there's a big difference between like US versus Europe. And there's a very big difference between when companies are like, I think it's like Fortune, I don't know if it's like Fortune 500 or whatever size it is, but I think that when companies are a certain size, their biggest 2 fears are their employees and their shareholders. That's the 2 things they actually fear. They don't fear their market anymore. They fear theirs too. And the worst thing that happens to them is when the employees are like, are we working with Pentagon? I'm going to walk out. They're like, no, we're not working with Pentagon. Please, code Googlers. Don't go walking out. We're not working with Pentagon, right? And the same thing is like, you know, a lot of these things where you realize that they're going to be like, no, shit. Don't get our shareholders pissed off. So like, don't do this. So I think those companies, they're fairly susceptible to thinking about this. And I think the funny thing is there's the absolute counterfactual, which are the really, really family owned. So like if you look at like Maersk or IKEA, for example, like Maersk is like the biggest shipping company in the world. Every 8th thing, if you look around in a room, every 8th thing in the room came through a Maersk container somewhere in the world. So they shipped quite a lot. The thing about Maersk is family owned. And when it's family owned, the thing about them is that they want to do stuff they're proud of for another like 6 generations. So they're some of the biggest climate leaders in the world. They just spend so much money on it. So they don't need any push. If you talk to Maersk, if you do anything which is shipping logistics and making sure that they feel better, and actually, like it's not about greenwashing because they don't even write reports. Like I mean, to the external world, they write reports internally. So for them, it's like legit climate, which is really interesting. But then I would say like if you're working with a company, like depending on what your product is, if your product is like it's very easy to explain to investors or employees, then probably like Fortune 500 would work. If you're working, and same thing if you're working with like early stage startups, what the heck your markets. And if you're working with, and then I would say like always with energy savings, it always helps. But I would say the other thing is I would say like US versus Europe, we've found very interesting, like European B2B companies, if you work with B2B in Europe, it feels like European companies are way more, I want to do this, I guess we'll figure it out. Whereas US companies are very much like, I want to do this, but how do I benefit? Like, how does this work for my salary and for my bonus for this year and for the P&L and everything? Where it feels like European companies are a bit like, I don't know if it's about like,
that's what I've noticed.
It's like, I don't know if it's like just a fear of carbon taxes or something in Europe, or if like Europeans are different on this one. But I think it's really interesting to see like, so we have done like, I think 2 B2C companies, and everyone else in our portfolio is like B2B or B2C. Yeah. And I think that on the B2B ones, most of them are ones where like our favorite joke is like the customer's CFO is a climate denier. That's like our famous joke. It's like we have these companies where it's just like they come in, it's like we optimize energy use, like energy for steel production with 30%. And they talk to like ArcelorMittal, and ArcelorMittal, like big steel producer. The CFO is like, is climate change really such a big thing? Oh, 30%. Oh yes, that's going to be so good for the quarter report that we are investing in doing steel less energy, because energy is really bad with steel, by the way. And you're like, he doesn't care shit about climate until now, because now he realized he can write this in a report. I think those companies are so sweet because like, hey, we're saving you energy. Like, you want to talk to us now? But of course, if you're working with something which is very kind of like hard to pin down to kind of money, then I think it's a challenge, and you have to kind of figure out that on the companies.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Long answer, sorry for that one.
No, it's good. It's perfect. Thanks.
Final question, Joshua.
Cool, thanks. Thanks, Hampus, for being on the call. So I'm Josh. I'm a product manager at a large computer hardware company right now, and I've been doing some grassroots sustainability stuff like substituting PCR stuff for virgin plastics and metals. And I've had my own early stage food startup while I was still a student at UC Berkeley. And I guess just over the past few years, I've been working on an investment thesis, just been like becoming more curious about the relationship between human health and the way we treat our planet, right? So I'd love to work in venture capital one day because I really enjoy the breadth of learning and just like connecting people with each other. I feel like that's my superpower. And I guess my question to you is, when do you think it would be a good time for someone like me who's still early in his career to transition into venture capital from an operator role? And just what can I be doing right now to prepare for the role?
Yeah, I think that I think there are two routes into venture capital. One is like depends on what your kind of inclination or how you wanted to work later. But I would say that the one route is like the Bain kind of route, where you just like, I'll crunch numbers to anyone. Like, I don't really care. And one day somebody's like, hey, can you crunch number for a PE fund? You're like, sure. And then one day they say, hey, can you be on this meeting when we talk about the company? And then you're just going to provide, like, be there and know stuff. And they're like, hey, why don't you help us with this? But that is the spreadsheet route. And it's like, it's the very kind of well-trodden path. So it's a thing where like, like you're going to be talking to like 200 other people who's like also baining themselves through to that path. The other path is you build a company within a sector, and then like when that company either is super successful or actually is not successful, but you are the super expert within like rare minerals on circuit boards, then people are like, fuck, didn't work out. Josh's company is folding, right? But then the VC who invested in you or the angel investor is like, hey, Josh is really smart. Like, look at what they did. And they're like, could you help us out with a couple of things? And the thing that the VCs really love is like VCs actually, what they like is most of all is deals. So it's like back to Brent's question. It's like they don't necessarily want to learn shit, but what they really like is if you say, hey, I could work for you and I can actually check a lot of like, could we make circuit boards with less kind of, rare minerals? Like, or like, could we make them more recyclable? Could we make them modular? Most VC will be like, that's a cool project. We can pay you 3 months to look into that. Because like, why not? Like, that's interesting. And then suddenly you essentially now, like one of the VC's thing is like, it's kind of very much like a teenage club of like out of sight, out of mind thing. So like, you're just going to be in the office every day. You're going to pick up like, oh yeah, I can look into that. And then very, very quickly, people are going to be like, make sure you bring in Josh because like he's smart. He has a lot of questions and you're going to apply themselves. And I think that the thing about it is that it takes a while from that to you kind of being involved in deals, to actually like voting on deals, to you actually running deals. And that process is long, unless you start your own fund. And I would actually say most people don't really realize that it's a huge difference being the one voting on deals versus being the one actually being the expert of deals. And I think the difference is like, I would jokingly say like it's the difference between like real-time strategy games versus like turn-based strategy games, or like poker versus chess. Some people would like, I want to see the chessboard, I want to think for a while, or like I want to run like turn-based strategy games. I want to think like what's the best move, and like I really don't want to do the wrong move. And other people would be like, they're going to play, Call of Duty or whatever. They're just going to run around like, I got to figure it out. And I think that the voting part is the one that has the least knowledge. So the painful part of being the voter is the person who says like, I don't think we should do this deal. And people's like, why? And you're like, I don't have a good feel about it. And you have 9 people around you like big PhD in the subject. You're like, you don't think we should do it? And like, I have a bad gut feel. So people will hate you and you have no data. And I think so if you're a person who feels like, no, I have no problem with that. So like my background story is the reason I can do this. I'm the 4th child. I have 3 older brothers and like, they know everything. I knew nothing. So I grew up 10 years in an environment where I would just had to like fake it. So like for me, being a VC is easy because I can just have so strong conviction about anything until people really call me out and say like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're 11. And I'm like, okay, I know what I'm talking about. But like if you talk to Ewell, my co-founder, he's much more like a chess person. So if I actually corner him, it's like, you don't know what we're talking about. He's like, oh shit, I feel so bad right now. I lied. I'm like, you didn't lie. You just had conviction, right? So I think it's one of those things like you have to figure out if you actually want to be voting, or if you just want to be, not just, but if you either want to be voting with low data, or you want to be providing actually awesome data and saying, here's how it works, here's how cement works, and you'll be the one called like deciding if we're gonna do this or not, but I don't want to vote. And I was like, everybody who's been at Pillar Dot, everybody who was the previous firm, everybody I know who was an expert and was smart, they just said, most of them said, I want to invest. And then 3 months in, they said, I really don't want to be the investing part. I don't understand how you can make a $10 million decision on like 1 day of information and a field we don't know shit about. And the partner's like, no, but we have to decide now. And you just feel like, I would just feel so uncomfortable about this, but yeah, that's what it is, right? It's kind of poker. You just have to say, I think I've got a good hand, I'm going to bet. And like, if you're a chess player, you don't want to play poker and vice versa. So, but I would say like the best thing is like build a company. I would say the best way of getting into VC is don't try to get into VC. Like build a company and be an expert in a system. And kind of like with Brent is like, just be an expert. And then people say, hey, can I ask you for help? And then I think that people will, and then like the thing when people ask you for help, I think the other way actually to get into VC is just being rather Buddhistic about it. So like not asking, so what's in it for me? If people's like, hey, Josh, could I do a quick call and just pick your brain about your field? If you just say yes and be nice, it's going to be 3 or 4 of those calls to people say like, Josh is really awesome. So like we work with a dude and it's like, who's like friend of a friend. Like we invested in his, like I invested in his previous company like two companies ago. And we had a question to him a while ago. And I sent him a question, asked him like, hey, I don't know if you've got the time, if you look into this. He sent a Notion page, which it must have taken like 3 hours to write. I looked at it and I was like, okay, Dennis, sorry, stupid question. How much do I have to pay you? Like this was like, I didn't want you to spend 3 hours. And he was like, no, I was just super curious about it. And I was like, oh shit, Dennis, this is awesome. But oh shit, I feel bad now. But thanks a lot, Dennis. Like I have already introduced him to the 3 funds. It is like, this is the person you want to talk about. Like he works at Fastly. So he knows everything about like firewalls and like security stuff. And as soon as anybody pings me, I'm like, talk to Dennis. You're going to get a Notion page, a wall of text, but I'm telling you, he's great. And I think that like, because he doesn't like answer and like, here's the answer, yes or no. He's just like, I'll write you a page and won't teach you to become master, but I'll tell you my recommendation. I'll break this thing apart and actually write a good article for you that you want to read and do a little video so you kind of get it. And I think that's the strength of like when somebody asks you, then answer in a way that they are going to love you.
Gotcha.
That's nice for everything in life, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you. Super useful.
No worries at all. And I realize we're running out of time, not only on this call, but like as a species as well. But like if you want anything else, then I mean, I'm on Twitter and you can figure me out. Like on my email address is easy as well, hampus@pilbur.vc. We're doing a big climate event that 21st of September. That's going to be in Europe though. It's going to be outside Copenhagen. One track is going to be called What's the Latest in X, which is like a 15-minute, super fast-paced thing with people just going through what's the latest in venture philanthropy, what's the latest in cement, what's the latest in steel, what's the latest in whatever, to actually get people who are thinking about going into climate to actually hear a lot of different fields. Happy to send you more info about it. It's not announced anywhere, and we're now only just invite only, but happy to like share it with this community if you feel like it's going to be useful for maybe the people on the European side, or if anybody happens to be in, on this side of the Atlantic in September.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, and I'll connect you with the European community, Hampus.
Great.
And if everybody on the call could just unmute if you can and just say a big group thank you to Hampus for sharing his wisdom, that'll be great. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Hampus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.